It is now 2 o'clock, and I'm calling this meeting to order. Wednesday. Oops. It is 2 o'clock. Test 1, 2.
Underneath.
Think of it like an airplane.
There we go.
Yes.
Throw it.
Hello. Oh, you know
Green
what?
means it should be on.
It's not here.
Who's not here?
We're canceled?
Oh.
Now it's on.
Okay.
Now you.
It always bothered me.
All right.
Oh, now
I guess that turns them on. All right, I'm calling to order the Wednesday, February 28th, 2024 meeting of the General Plan Review Committee. Board members present, myself here, Don Michaelman,
Here.
Tom Hutchison,
Andre Carmen?
Andre Carmen, here,
Just arrived.
Mary Fredrickson,
she's absent.
okay, Ralph Hess,
Here.
Jim Huffman, Rod Moyer,
Here.
Gary Warub,
Here.
James McCarver, and Tom Riley.
Here.
All right, everybody's here except for Mary Fredrickson.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
can I ask a big favor? Could that picture get off of there? I don't want to see that ever again until next week.
You're ready for spring. All right. Also, for council liaison, we have Ted Gambogi. And Lois is not here today, but we have Connie. So Connie from the city council is here. And this is an open public meeting, and is being recorded by the city. Proceedings are televised by representatives of the public media. The public, local cable, and/or radio stations may also rebroadcast. The number of board members present is, let me see, that's 10, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, 10, and it will require 6 votes for a majority. All parties wishing to be heard, including committee members, are required to state their name prior to speaking in order to ensure proper recordation. Members of the public are required to state their name and address for the record so that we may know who is speaking and to be able to contact them at a later date if necessary. But a lot of the people we already know, like JD, everybody knows JD. And so on to open call to the public.
The City of Prescott welcomes public engagement. Residents may comment and address the committee on matters not included on the agenda during the call of the public. Please complete a speaker card at the back and submit it to me prior to the meeting. Pursuant to ARS, members of the committee may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda, and therefore interaction will be limited to the following: responding to criticism, requests to staff to investigate and report on the matter, or requests that the matter be scheduled on a future agenda. And we have one speaker, JD Grieper.
Oh, also for whoever is recording, please note that Lois Fruworth just came in, so she is present as well. Hey, Lois.
Hello, everyone. I'm rather nervous today because I just feel it's so important, the work that this committee is doing, and especially regarding the land use plan. I just came from over at the county. The SIMPO meeting is still in progress. You'll be glad to know that at the time that I left, it looked very, very favorable that the no-build option was going to be approved officially today for the Sundog corridor. So that's a win for a lot of public opinion. I also wanted to bring up the fact that I asked for the county guidelines on what dealing with open space. And they have in their open space and preservation. So one of the things that's really important is that not only that we have the open space already in our area, that we ensure that it's going to be protected, which I think that your committee member Ralph Hess is going to be talking about later on, but also I am very nervous today. I apologize. But I think it's really important that the public, they aren't going to have the time to go through all of this. And even with a lot of my background in open space and wildlife corridors and everything, it was kind of hard for me to go through all of this with the county. And one of the things that I learned when I was given this is just like our general plan, the general plan for the county is not enforceable. And there are so many elements that you guys are working on that are so critical. There still needs to be some way that it's incorporated into the strategic plan, into the land use plan, or into the city charter. I think that there needs to be more publicity about the fact that this general plan is meeting, that people can come, that they can give their input. I went to another meeting this morning, and it was made up of different representatives from different things. And I'll tell you, one of the waves that's going to be coming in is the whole pronghorn issue. People want to save the pronghorn. Well, in order to do that, there has to be continuous wildlife corridors for them. And that's going to be a growing concern in the community. And as you've seen, there's a lot that gets accomplished by these community groups like Save the Dells. So just be aware that that's going to be coming, and they want to have a voice. And I think that if we publicize these general plan meetings, or the fact that they could be giving input now, will help. Because the other thing that someone mentioned to me this morning is when I said, well, should we wait until later when it goes to the public for public comment to get people to give more advice? And I was told it needs to be in writing the first time around before it goes out to the general public, because otherwise it doesn't always get included. So please, you guys are doing such important work, and it speaks to whatever is going on in the area. There's so many of the topics that you guys are dealing with workforce housing, with just all the topics that I've been sitting in and listening to you guys discuss. But many of them are all interrelated. And one of the things that was pointed out to me by Councilperson Gambogi at the open house that you had at the beginning of this process was when he went out to get signatures on his petition, he realized that developers are limited to landscaping only with native plants. But there's nothing that's said in terms of the community regarding what a private person can do. They can put in acres of grass. They can put in trees that require, a lot of water that are invasive. So I know that that's a touchy issue because it gets into legal rights of a private homeowner. But on the other hand, I think we need to at least bring that to the attention of the public to let them know that that's an issue as well. So thank you again, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you, JD. And I think what's going on today, because usually we have more public here and we encourage the public to come, but we have a competing meeting that's got a hot topic, and that's the SIMPO meeting this afternoon. And I think that there's many of the public that would have been here are at the SIMPO meeting this afternoon.
But they'll be watching.
Okay, all right. All right, thanks, JD. Anybody else?
That's it.
Okay, thank you. All right, on to discussion and action items. A, approval of the January 31st, 2024 General Plan Committee meeting minutes. Recommended action is moved to approve the minutes as presented. Do we have any discussion on the minutes from last month? Yes, Tom.
Two things. One, damn. Two things. One is you had mentioned, Tammy, that we were going to get some white papers from Greg Murray that regarded some of the issues that we're not discussing today, but I was wondering if those white papers were forthcoming.
They'll be when we discuss those topics. One was on climate and one was on climate. Yeah, they'll come with the sections that they discuss.
Okay.
The white papers are for.
Thank you. I wanted to clarify that. And number two would be the spell. We had a speaker that spoke at the beginning of the meeting, last meeting, and it was Julie Pinzola, not Pendola. So I'm wondering if we could do her some justice and spell her name correctly.
Okay.
That's it. With that being said, unless there's any other discussion, I'll make a motion.
All right.
I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Okay, seconded by Don Michaelman. And a show of votes. Hands. Okay, and did,
Saying I was absent.
okay, so we have 9 in favor, 1 abstention, and 1 absent. All right, passes 9-0. Okay, next item is presentation and discussion from the City Planning Division regarding land use section with the land use map.
So I provided you all with a hard copy and of the what was on the agenda. So if you have any comments or notes as we go through this, feel free to write all over it or whatever, and just leave them, and I'll collect them at the end of the meeting so we can get your guys' comments in case we don't capture it. So feel free to write on it or circle things or make notes of your comments, or if you already have them, leave those too. So we'll just be providing these at the meetings. I would do it before, but sometimes I don't have everything ready when we have this meeting for the next meeting. So, but I'll get them to you as soon as I can. But we'll just try to have a hard copy here for all of you so you can write on them in case you don't have it, so you don't have to print it yourself. So I want to turn it over to George, and he's going to go through the land use section.
Thank you, Tammy. If I'm not talking loud enough, let me know. I'm going to go through really quickly just a high-level look at how I've written the various parts of this out, because a lot of these chapters and sections that you're getting are coming from staff who's just taken sections that are based on, do you have your diagram of our new format? We're going to be formatting everything into this, and knowing that in advance, I broke out parts of what I believed are land use elements that are related to those various big ideas, whatever we're calling them. So I'm going to walk through those real quick, but the key for this meeting, at least my intention for this meeting, is to hear from you specifically and especially on the goals and strategies that are laid out in each of the sections. I'm sorry?
Do we have that paper in here?
I don't know if we do. You have it.
Not that one.
We gave it out to you a couple of meetings ago, sorry.
That's this.
And
Yes.
it's been changed.
It's a little bit different than that, but
So no matter
similar.
when it's given out again, it'll be given out again.
I'll give it to you again.
Thank you.
Yes, we'll email it back out. So one of the things that we've tried to do in the past was to follow the state statutes as if it were a table of contents. And the previous general plans are laid out just like that. The first section is the first thing that's called out in the statutes. It makes for something that we know addresses the statute's requirements, but doesn't make for very interesting reading. And there's not a lot of continuity between those sections because of the way the statutes are written. The concept that Tammy presented to you and this committee agreed to follow looks at things with a different perspective, a bigger picture perspective. Again, it's a general plan. We don't want to and don't need to get into very specific details. And that gives us the ability to section out something like the concept of sustainability. And that can mean many different things. In land use, we believe sustainability addresses the mix of land uses, that we have sufficient, the mix of land uses, that we have sufficient mix of land uses, that we have sufficient commercial properties available to support the residential properties that we have the right mix of open space with industrial, that those types of things are in a balance that makes sense to the community. To Prescott specifically, there is no universal right balance anywhere. It's subject to community needs. So that's one of the things that we talk about in the resiliency section, is that we have a balance and what that balance is. We also looked at, there's some introduction, planning hierarchy introduction, just to give people who are reading this for the first time the understanding that the general plan is the 10,000 30-foot view. And that below that, there are other plans, and ultimately the enforcement actions is through zoning. And we have a zoning map and a land use map that we can talk about if you need to talk about specifics or you want to talk about particular areas. I think the land use map will also be helpful in discussion of the major plan amendment that's on the agenda later, being able to look at where development can occur. So again, just running through real quickly, community connectiveness is something that most places perceive to be strictly vehicle connectiveness, and I believe it's more than that. So we've addressed trail connectivity, open space connectivity, as well as pedestrian and vehicular connectivity. So you'll notice in the sections that we've talked about connectivity in multiple different ways. The Great Places concept is basically our spot to brag about Prescott. What's so great about Prescott? What's good about us? What attracts people to us? Why do people who move here stay here? So we've talked about land uses, but we've also talked about some of the things that are balanced with land uses in that section. Preservation of our existing historic districts and historic properties in town. Very important for our character in Prescott. So we have a whole section talking about that.
George, are you going to go back to these sections?
Yes,
With a more
absolutely.
detail?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So
But,
hold
but
on
if you have questions along the way, feel free. I'm good with
When do you want
questions.
questions? When you do the overall?
Let me finish a quick run through and then we'll go back to the beginning and we'll start with questions. Again, as much as I like to talk, those of you who know me, the purpose of this meeting is to hear from you. And specifically, it's to hear from you about the goals and the strategies. The text is less important at this point because we will modify the text to match the goals and strategies that come out of this discussion and out of future meetings. The text is supposed to support the goals and strategies. Purpose of this document is to come up with something that's the term enforceable has been used many times, and we've talked about a follow-on plan. That follow-on plan is the goals and strategies. That's how you make it happen through enactment of goals and strategies.
George,
Sir.
Just 2 weeks ago, the city council had a 2-day workshop on
The strategic
planning.
Yes.
Are we going to make a strong effort to align the general plan with the strategic planning goals that the city council came up with?
We're certainly going to take all of that into consideration. That is something that you will be talking about along the way. But again, if you consider the hierarchy of things in the city council's strategic plan should be based on the general plan. That's the one that's approved by the voters. Eventually, once we adopt a new general plan and once the voters have approved that new general plan, it should influence the strategic plan. But since we're in the development process, this current strategic plan is going to have a lot of weight in what we put into this plan and bring to the public.
George, one of the areas that's extremely important to me, and I have a history in it, but I've attended at least 3 workshops, and Leslie was there, that Matt Colleen has done.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to tune in? I don't know. I don't think I ever found out or didn't ask what his time frame is for the $93,000 grant he got for land use, especially for climate and water. Will you be able to tie that in? Do you know? Because to me, it's
Yeah, we don't know yet, but when we bring that section forward, so one of the sections you're going to be looking at, one of the chapters will
Yeah.
be resiliency, and it's likely to be included in that. We
Yeah.
don't have any information from them at the moment.
yeah. Well,
So we
he's
reach back out to them.
he just started, so
Yeah, he might not be ready to have that.
yeah. But that's extremely crucial when we're talking about vision and future. That's the future of Prescott.
Very good. One of the things that the state statutes do give some enforcement ability to in the general plan. So it's a plan. It's not an ordinance. It's not zoning. It's a plan. But one of the things that they do have some controlling factors that are attached to is land use. The city has to adopt a land use map, and that land use map has controlling ability over rezoning of property. If you rezone the property, it needs to be compatible with, and further the general plan's land use element. So we look at those maps when anyone comes to us for a rezoning. Sorry, I'm pointing at the two maps. To verify that the zoning either is compatible with the land use map or that the land use map needs to be amended first. And that's something that city council can do. They can amend the land use map, and they're often done together. So that happens. Probably 1 in 5 rezonings involve a master or a map amendment for the general plan as well. Did you have a
George?
question?
Jim Huffman, those two maps do not agree with each other.
That's
north of
correct.
The airport. You are, I'm sure, very aware of that.
Yes. So the zoning map indicates the actual zoning of the property, and the land use map indicates what's anticipated in the future. The future 10 years ago.
Are we going to let you go through the rest of this thing first, and then we're going to come back and ask questions?
It's up
Because
to you. You just asked the question, so go ahead.
Okay, well, I think an explanation of what the difference is between a land use map and a zoning map. I mean, because there is quite a bit of a legal difference between the two.
There's a big
And that might be a good explanation, not only for all of us, but just for those that are going to be watching after they're done with the SIMPO meeting.
Perfect. So a land use map is a determination of where we want something to go. It is future planning for land uses. In most cases, you have existing development that's already in place that already has specific zoning on it that's compatible with the existing land use. So the land use map often matches. And if you walk through the two maps side by side, a lot of it matches because it's already developed. There's not an opportunity to change it from a residential neighborhood to something else, for instance. So the maps will match up. This map in many general plans and in many other parts of the country in the comprehensive plan, that's the terminology used east of the Mississippi, is called a future land use map. And it's a future land use map because it's what we want land use to be in the future, not necessarily what it already is, which is the zoning map. In some cases, because, again, it's already developed, we already know what the land uses are, they're going to be in conformance with each other. In many, especially in North Prescott on these two maps, they're going to look different because there's a lot of development that's still occurring in the north part of Prescott that.
Thank you.
You putting them side by side? Uh-oh, watch out.
You almost got me.
That's why I usually don't do this.
There you go. It does let you see them better. It was,
Yeah, I can read that from here.
well, it's all about the colors. Again, the intention of the general plan's land use map is to address the future land uses. The intention of the zoning is to address current land uses and to control those current land uses through regulation.
Tom Hutchison here. What is this forecasted land use map based on? How did you come about the proposed or desired use?
Now you've made a mistake. You're going to be here till 5 o'clock. No, I'm kidding. One thing we did, so the first time we addressed the land use map in this format was as a result of the state adopting Growing Smarter legislation in the late 1999 and early 2000 timeframe. So the 2003 general plan map looked like this. The map that we had in our general plan before that didn't at all. It was a map with blobs is actually a good descriptor, blobs of color depending on the types of uses we anticipated. So what we did at that time was to look at what other plans do we already have that cover some of those areas. It's a little hard to see, but there's a blue outline over this area. That was a land use plan that was adopted called the Airport Specific Area Plan. It had land use designations that were based on negotiations with property owners, with the involvement of the airport, with the involvement of transportation planning, SIMPO, and other transportation planning organizations to figure out what development would occur out here and what types of uses would occur in certain areas. So it was based on logic, based on negotiations with property owners, and based on already existing development patterns that we could see in the city. Where we had land use plans already in place, we adopted them into the general plan's initial land use map. So airport specific area plan, this one's called the Willow Lake North area plan, and this one's called the Prescott East area plan. So we already had land use plans in place for each of those three areas that had been negotiated with property owners and developers again. So we incorporated those in. Much of the rest of the city was already developed. So we took the zoning map and the zoning designations and used those to create the land uses because there was already a pattern established. We had commercial corridors already established. We had residential neighborhoods that were already established. Even if they weren't developed out completely, it was unlikely that they were going to change character. So that's how the central core of the city was done. Otherwise, it was these three area plans that we had developed over the years in negotiations with the property owners and developers that fed us into this. There was logic involved in it. There was negotiation involved in it. And it wasn't a staff-generated concept. We involved the public and the property owners as part of that process.
So do you see this new general plan impacting that, changing that?
To a degree, yes, I do. Especially in those areas where we know development patterns have changed somewhat in the vicinity of the airport. Those things need to be addressed in this plan. We need to look at what's going to happen in the areas that perhaps don't already have a master plan, that aren't part of Deepwell Ranch, for instance, which is here, that aren't part of the Arizona Eco Development over here. So we need to look at what's going on in those areas and what we anticipate happening in the future, 10 years out, when none of us will be on this committee any longer, except maybe Andre.
Half of us may not
Yeah,
even
we're
be
going to
here.
grab you for the next one 10 years from now. That's an important part of the process. It may not be the immediate next step that we're doing right now. Developing the goals and strategies and then coming back to the map afterwards and looking at it again may be an easier approach to it. You can contemplate what your goals and strategies are, and then you can make sure that the map's going to line up with them. And this is the last time that I'm going to bring this map. This one's the important one. You're looking into the future. You're not looking at the existing, and you're not looking in the past. Wow, that
Question
sounded
for you,
like-
Mr. Worley.
Sounded like a lecture. I apologize.
No, that's okay. We asked for it. In the,
Actually,
Let-
you asked for it.
I was trying to
rest
be more
of these guys-
egalitarian. The main difference between the two here is on the land use plan. Ask me if this is fair. On the land use map in the upper right-hand corners, we have these. That'd be the left hand. Well, it's my left hand. Yeah. Yeah, my left, my right. Those areas there, those are not for specific parcels. Those are just general indications that in that residential area, there should be some support for that residential area through a commercial use.
That's correct. So
It may not be there, but it'll be someplace in there. And that's what the land use map gives us, that general direction. Is that correct?
that is correct. And many land use maps don't show parcel boundaries on them at all. If you look at a lot of general plans in the valley, for instance, south, they will show color schemes similar to this. This map actually has parcel lines on it if you get close enough.
I noticed
that may or may not be helpful. Maybe the parcel lines
I guess
come
what I
off.
want to make sure of is that if somebody comes in here and they say, well, you put this little shape over here, and so therefore that shape needs to be done in commercial, that is not the situation.
That is correct.
Okay, that's just a
that
general
isn't
indication that something's going to happen. Thank you. You don't want me to knock it over because
Yeah.
it'll fall on you.
That you're absolutely right. The idea is, generally speaking, general plan. Generally speaking, we're going to get development here that's going to be residential. We're going to get development here because we have a crossroads that we anticipate, and therefore commercial makes sense or mixed use makes sense. It's not specific to an individual parcel.
Okay, so the thing in this general land use plan, the point that I'm getting to, is now that we've located generally where we say, yeah, this should be kind of this kind of residential development and some support in there, given the configuration of that land, should we also not be looking at, do we want to have some green corridors in here, walking corridors, things like that? And can we put maybe just like little green lines through there that mean as much as the red lines that we have?
I suppose we could.
Well, I throw that out to the rest
Yeah.
of the committee.
Well, one thing to consider, we did give you a list of the land use definitions that come out of the current 2015 plan. That those definitions, if you look at them, in almost every case allow for more than one type of use. So unlike zoning, it's not single family only. It's single family with supporting commercial in some cases. And it's partially to address what you just brought up. A 10,000-foot look at the property, it's probably 50,000-foot look at the property, doesn't necessarily show you that we're going to have a trail system over here. It shows you that some things we want to have controls over, like Granite Creek, shows as green because we want it to remain a green corridor.
And we know that in our land development codes and what have you, we have some support for having those open space and those corridors and the connectivity of corridors and things like that. It's just that I've seen too many times when in the past in general plans where somebody's come forward and said, yes, but your general plan says this needs to happen in this particular area and you're not showing it here, so therefore it shouldn't be happening. And I guess it gives fodder for protest.
Understood.
Is what I'm thinking. And I'm thinking if we can put maybe just a little Spidey network up there of, some green lines and things like that, that does that it says, well, look, this is what we're supposed to do. That's my suggestion for the rest of the committee to consider.
I think that's one way to address it. And additional support for that would be to perhaps readdress our definitions of the various land use types so that we make sure that they're clear in covering it. Address the map, address the text.
And George,
Both.
looking at this map, do you see, the city council is placing in priority on protecting the land around the airport for future development and growth of the airport. You anticipate some changes on the land use general plan?
A couple of them specifically. So we know Deepwell Ranch has their master plan, and that master plan is basically a mixed use that we don't have shown on the map. The map was not amended at the time of Deepwell Ranch master plan because it was a determination made by someone that we didn't need to amend the plan because all of those uses were covered by it. I think we do need to amend the plan, and I think it should clearly show that it's mixed use for that area. We have a very large area that's just showing as agricultural and ranching that probably won't be entirely agricultural in 10 years. It may be partially still, and maybe the majority of it, but I think we need to look at the potential for what happens if we annex one more piece. What if the property owner of property that's shown as agricultural is going to come into the city, having already considered it on the land use map, may make it easier for the city to plan ahead for it. And again, we're not necessarily trying to make it easier on the property owners. We're making it easier on us. We have to plan for infrastructure. We have to plan for road networks. And if we think that it could happen, we should plan for it even if it never happens.
Okay, and then to Tom's point, then that makes it hopefully less likely you're going to end up with a bunch of people protesting. You can't do this because it's not on the land use general plan map,
Right.
Because
And-
we're going to have it on there.
And that's another thing that we need to continuously help try to remind the Planning Commission, because Planning Commission is involved in any review of the general plan maps changes, but also remind the general public the map can be changed. Council has the legal right to change the map. Even if the map is approved and adopted and voted on by the voters as part of the general plan adoption, the map has to be amendable. It's not amenable. It's amendable in order to take into consideration unexpected changes that will occur in the future. We have circumstances already where things that we never considered coming into Prescott are here now. We have very high-tech development that 10 years ago was just sort of maybe we'll have high-tech development someday, and not as effectively covered in the plan as it probably should have been.
Let me just ask a quick question, Jim McCarver. Is the general plan going to include areas that are outside the city limits? Are you going to comment on the use of those, even though this is mostly designed for city limit planning, isn't it?
it's mostly the land use plan by state statutes. Municipalities are allowed to create land use planning that could affect future annexations out to, it's either 2 or 3 miles, I forget which, outside the boundaries of the city. We typically don't go that far here, but we have on the current general plan land use map looked beyond the boundaries of the city by a half mile to a mile in some cases. So we do look outside the city, and we've looked outside the city in specific areas around the airport, but there are other areas out there that we may want to look further.
George, related to what you were just talking about, outside the city limits, there's a comment about planning is done in cooperation with neighboring regions. How does that work? Can you say anything about that? I mean,
So based on past practice, what happens is when we get a draft of our plan, we send it to the adjacent municipalities, Prescott Valley and Chino Valley specifically, and the county for them to look at. And their planning divisions, departments will review that plan in consideration of what their plans are now, or if they're working on a future plan, what those future plans are, and provide us comments back. So when we adopted that plan in 2015, it matches up almost exactly with Prescott Valley's plan where the two plans overlap. They match. We work together to make them match in land uses. And we would do the same thing in the future. For the county, it's a little less of an issue because generally speaking, when counties develop their comprehensive plans, they will allow for that buffer of cities planning beyond with the anticipation of possible annexations. So sometimes it's just a holding pattern. Sometimes it's an actual designation. The prior county comprehensive plan actually had a ring around cities in the county that was designated as municipal planning areas or something similar to that because it was anticipated that the cities would plan beyond the boundary.
perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Tom, and then Ralph,
Okay.
and then Don.
So is it our job to sit here and take a look at that nice little green area that's up at the top, that's agricultural, that's, instead of cows being there, there's not all cows there now, there's a lot of housing in there. Should this committee be making a recommendation as to what kind of land use should be happening in that neck of the woods?
There's a couple of ways it can work. We can bring you suggestions.
I was hoping it was a yes or no,
Yes.
George, but go ahead.
Well, it's kind of a yes, no, and maybe. We can bring you suggestions for those areas based on good planning principles. There's a lot of good planning principles out there that you can apply and say, logically, because of this, we anticipate this type of development, type A. If it's something else, we would say it's probably this type of development, type B. I anticipated staff bringing you options to address those areas and having the committee select from those options to include in the plan. We're still subject to additional input. So we're going to have a public review period, and the public's going to come back to us and go, oh my God, you can't do that. And we're going to be back in front of you, or we're going to be in front of the Planning Commission and saying, the public doesn't support this. What do you think about these changes?
I think we should be moving forward and trying to put a. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay. All right, Ralph Hess. Just to follow up on what Tom was asking, that wasn't my question, but following on what Tom was pointing out, ultimately it's up to the city council. And if I recall correctly, with the 2015 general plan, the city council made a change to the land use map right before they voted upon it.
At the
So
meeting,
it was,
they voted.
and it was different recommended, and it was to accommodate a particular developer. So my question is, historically, the public has been a little bit dissatisfied with the fact that developers have presented a plat, considered it, was approved, and then that included commercial property or a commercial portion of the property being developed commercially. And then came back later told the council it's not feasible to put commercial development on the property, and we now want to put in more rooftops. We want to put more residences.
Right.
So my question is, when that happens, how often has it been required to change the land use map? I guess if it was zoned as mixed use, they might be able to do that without having to
Right.
change the land use map. But in your experience historically, how often has that happened that you had to change the land use map? And what do we need to consider as a committee in order to prevent that from happening in the future?
So a couple of things to consider. Both our zoning and our land use categories are generally multifaceted. They allow multiple types of uses within them. Commercial zoning, going with your example specifically, allows the most uses. It allows all the residential uses plus commercial uses. That's by our zoning code. It's also by definition in the general plan to allow the same thing. If a developer comes to us and says, we want to annex or we want to rezone and we want to have a certain area commercial, and later finds that they can't attract commercial users to that area and they want to do something else with it, it very often does not involve a rezoning. It involves something else, some other land use action like a subdivision plat change or something like that.
Oh, Terry?
Where there are rezonings that occur that require a map amendment, again, it's about 1 in 5, and normally it's going from a low-intensity use like single-family residential only to something that has more options to it. So generally it is an increase in the flexibility of the use of the property that's triggered the rezoning request and the map amendment. So it's an upzoning, if you want to call it that usually triggers a map amendment and not a change from higher intensity to lower intensity. In most cases, those are already permitted by the district's definitions and allowed uses. Okay.
Yeah. So I wanted to follow up on an important part that Tom Riley brought up, and it links to a term that you brought up, which I think is extremely important, and that's healthy communities. In the last several weeks, I rented a program which I'm very familiar with, been using since 2001. It's the largest research tool in the world for grants and what the trends are. So I have been looking exactly at this, what are healthy communities and who's funding them, and what tools are they using to fund it through. Well, I'm not talking millions now, I'm talking billions are being funded for healthy communities, land use especially. You talked workforce housing. Connie, well, she left. She came up with the term affordable workforce housing. But now the major foundations are not talking funding those if you're not talking healthy communities, if you're not talking trails, open space, outdoor recreation, that entire vision. So I sent some things to Chelsea, some data and some facts about where the monies are that Prescott are not getting any of. Number one, we don't have a community development corporation in Prescott.
No.
It's missing.
It'd be nice if we did, because they would be the lead on the affordable workforce housing.
Affordable,
Yeah.
yes. And we don't have a permanent full-time grant proposal writer. Each department is left to fight on their own without support. So we're missing major tools here. When we talk about the future of land use, of open space, of anything related to Prescott, we're still in the dark ages. And I think this group here should insist in the general plan that we look forward to how do we get those tools here. The two especially, full-time grant proposal writer, and a community development corporation. And then the amount of monies coming to Prescott are minuscule or zero compared to what would happen if we think towards the future. So thank you, Tom, for pushing that.
And if I could, I didn't fully address Mr. Riley's comment about the map. One of the things that we have, in addition to just the land use map, as you are well aware, because all of you have read the 2015 plan thoroughly, right? Is multiple maps, and we do have a trails and open space map that's included in the plan. So we have what you're asking about, but it's not shown on the land use map. And maybe that's what we do, is combine some of those elements together, some of those features onto a single map, because it will have more impact.
If you don't, you open yourself up to negative interpretation.
George, I believe Prescott Valley has completed their general plan, right?
Yes, yes.
Have we compared theirs to what we're looking at to make sure there is no challenges out there that we need to address?
We have actually, one thing that Tammy's going to be the hand model. So we've taken the areas that were in our land use map that they've annexed and have actually rezoned and are in process of developing to show where they are. But we have a map that overlays the two land use maps together so that we can see exactly what they're proposing to do along those boundaries, and they can see exactly what we're proposing to do along those same boundaries. So the answer is yes. We've looked at what they propose to do. We've looked at where their annexations have already occurred. Basically, at that point, we're out of the picture. We have little influence over land uses in the city. It's the matching of the boundaries so that we don't have an industrial park in Prescott Valley next to a low-density residential area in the city of Prescott. So we've done that. We will give them a chance to do the same thing with our plan when we get to the point of having a draft and can provide it to them.
I have a suggestion or a request, depending on how you look at it, for both of you, Tammy, George. Ideally, we would have an online series of maps where you could overlay these. I mean, you look at these maps, they get so complex that you can't address individual things or compile them, like the trails, things like that, where you could superimpose that on.
Tammy's going to talk about her vision. Tammy's going to talk about her vision for a plan that will get her an award from the American Planning Association.
At least the state. So everything is going to be digital. Now, whether we can have a map online that we can click on different layers, that's something we'll have to talk to our GIS department about, if there is something like that. I know the county GIS map, the interactive, you can click on those, and they also have an open space map and trails maps and stuff that they update all the time. So, but that's more regionally. We also have SIMPO is expanding their boundary, and they're also going to be doing an environmental study. So some of the stuff, like for the wildlife corridors and stuff, in talking with Game and Fish, we've agreed that we're going to focus more on the SIMPO because it's going to be more regional, and we're going to address it in the plan that we're going to be working with SIMPO to make sure that all that's comprehensive, because they have all the wildlife data and stuff. And it's all being updated right now with Game and Fish and the Forest Service, because they're all part of the EMAC committee, which is a subcommittee of SIMPO that looks at the environmental mitigation. So that's something that SIMPO is going to be working on as part of, I think, their next plan. But we're going to be focusing a lot on that to make sure that we have that data and that information as these projects get developed of the North Prescott area and Prescott Valley, that we make sure we see where those connectivities can occur. But until you have the data, it's really hard to plan. We don't know where the wildlife are going, or where their existing corridors are. So we do have some of that, but it's pretty outdated information with the new developments. But Game and Fish is going to be updating their information, and we'll have access to that.
Thank you.
And to add on to that answer, if there is a way to make if there are any ways to make this plan more interactive and accessible to the public, we're shooting for that. We've looked at a bunch of plans that have interactive mapping as part of the plans in other communities. If they can make it happen, we can make it happen. There are a number of plans out there that have very interactive maps for certain areas. You can zoom into your neighborhood and see things in the general area of your neighborhood and zoom back out, and maybe it's less interactive as you look at the whole city. So things like that are all on the table for us. Sir.
I promise to be brief.
Your name's Tom, not George.
You guys are tough. I want to embellish Tom and some of the other members' comments just a bit. And I'm wondering, is this an opportunity? Is this a vehicle to solving some of our big objectives? Some of the things that we know we want and need to do over the next 5 to 10 year period, and to deliberately specify on that map what can and can't go in there.
Yes.
I'm thinking affordable housing. I'm thinking industrial. I'm thinking whatever. It's the flip side of what Tom was suggesting, that we don't want to have people arguing about, but we specify that, in fact, these are things we're doing and why.
So it's a yes. I thought it was going to be my shortest answer of the day, but there's a caveat that goes with it. Whatever we put in the plan, whatever we're looking at on the future land use map, I think we're going to rename it that, the future land use map, it doesn't obviate the existing zoning and the existing property rights that are already in the hands of the owners of those properties. So if we decide that a particular area of town through this mapping process should be commercial or should be multifamily high density of some kind, and the existing zoning that's in place is single family zoning, they have a right to do that. And we can't take that right away without paying them compensation if it degrades the property value. Most of the time, I don't think we're going to reduce property values by doing things like that, but it's possible.
So the question, to build on that, getting back to that big green area up in the top over there, should we be suggesting in this meeting today what we would like to see happen in that area? Now, by way of example, the existing zoning in that area is residential 2-acre, predominantly in the county.
Probably.
Okay, so, and here on our use map, it's for, cows and grass. Okay, well.
And cowboys.
Yes, so I think what we should do, we know what kind of development has been happening in that area. We know the kind of development that we'd like to see happen throughout the city. It is probably the biggest vast area of open land that remains in the city. So some of the things and some of our, hopes and wishes and dreams, we could probably take and kind of focus a little bit and put some of that stuff out in that area. And should we do that? Connie wants cell towers out. Not Connie. Lois wants cell towers out there.
Where they're going to go.
It's flat.
They got to go somewhere.
Just- yep.
And then the thing is, if we come up with something as a group and we put that out there, then the public has an idea of what we're thinking, and they can act on it. They can say, yeah, I think you got that right, or, oh, no, man, you guys need to get out of town, and then the city council will make their decisions as to what goes finally to the public for a vote. So I think that, is that this meeting today?
Not necessarily, but it is this committee's responsibility to provide that kind of input. And it is your responsibility to say, hey, what we want to see out here is this. And then when we go to the public for public input during that public 60-day review period, they can come back and say, oh, no. The property owner can come back and say, oh, no.
We really aren't, we really haven't talked amongst ourselves well enough to know what we'd all like to see out there. And perhaps some of our thoughts are more extemporaneous than they are well considered. So I would like to see, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, agendizing the land use map, a discussion of what's going to happen in those vacant areas, in a future meeting that we have.
I think we can certainly accommodate that.
Sure, absolutely. And that whole green area right now is outside the city limits, but we can say, we think that should be high-density housing with designated locations for cell towers, because they need
on the high ground. On the high ground, right. We have to find high ground out there.
Okay.
No, actually, that is exactly a good suggestion. We bring the map back as a separate topic. The text and the map have to work together, but they don't have to match up exactly. the text is going to be something that's applicable across multiple maps and multiple layers of the general plan.
I think that that's,
All right.
we've done
I
that.
think,
in past plans.
yeah, I think we can move on unless any burning questions before we move on?
Are we doing general or are we going to questions? We kind of got off track.
We did a little bit, but you invited me to the meeting, so there. One of the things that we anticipated, that's all it takes. I show up anyway. One of the things that we were looking for today is actually getting your responses back, and it doesn't have to be at this meeting, but discussion of the various goals and strategies is important. Getting your comments back on that either today verbally or in writing today or in writing later will help us address the text. Again, we want to start with the goals and strategies and make the text match them, not the other way around. The goals and strategies are the implementation process for the plan, so let's start with those. And if you have specific things now that you want to talk about, we're very happy to hear it.
You don't.
I know this will come as a shock to you, but I do.
I think next time we don't invite them.
No. Well, if we're going to start with this, let's go with the resiliency and sustainability land use segment, starting with that. Is that-
Are we ready to, okay, are we ready to move on to the next item on the agenda then?
No.
Oh, okay. This
So
is part of-
still under land use.
Okay,
So
still under land use.
within
Okay.
the element, we've broken out segments that match up with the big chapters that you'll be reviewing. So resiliency and sustainability is the
It's still part of it.
is really
Okay.
the first
Yes,
segment.
okay. Do you want to talk about that, or do you want to let Tom get into his
Get
suggestions
into the
for that?
weeds.
I'm fine with the weeds at this point. Honestly, hearing from you guys is really what we're here for.
Do you want to give a little introduction on the resiliency and sustainability before we get into the weeds?
I'm thinking you've all read it.
Okay.
So
But the
let's
public
get into the
may not
weeds.
have. So,
With several meetings ago, we divided the plan into a series of chapters instead of, as I mentioned before, following the state statute sections, which make for a very difficult read. We segmented the plan into things that are interrelated to one another. And one of those segments was sustainability for the city of Prescott. And sustainability can address everything from economic development to make sure that we have the right businesses that are coming in to support the community, that we have the correct balance of those businesses, to that we have a proper land use balance. And this particular section is land use associated with that sustainability chapter.
okay.
But
All right, Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, on the resiliency and sustainability, this is, by the way, this is all pretty well written and thought out. Thank you for that. One thing that I put into here, and I wrote it down so I can give it back to you, is we talk very specifically about Prescott. Now, yes, this is a general plan for Prescott, but we just had a conversation about our neighbors and what have you. And I think in the resiliency and sustainability land use segment, we need to address the fact that we're not in this alone, and that we do have neighbors, and that how we're addressing those neighbors and the overlap, the explanation you just gave would be good in here for folks to be able to read. That's number one. I don't know if anybody has any comments on that.
I have a comment, not on that. But sort of on that.
Gary, go ahead.
So strategy 1.2, assists in the creation of a CDC. Who's going to form the CDC? Oh, wait, stop.
if we form a CDC, it needs to be a not-for-profit. And
Right.
it needs to be a separate entity, and we can assist, but the city can't form it. So
Well-
we can draft people, we can invite people to participate in it, and that is something that our Workforce Housing Committee has talked about, to get someone to set up a CDC or something similar to it. There are other not-for-profit type organizations that could do the same thing.
Well, the CDC is the most powerful. And again, I've done lots of research in the last few weeks and sent that to Chelsea, showing the amount here that the city doesn't get and the amount that's out there. But I'm curious, Because
I just heard you volunteer to help, so thank you.
well, I did this. No, I started this a dozen years ago when Marlon was becoming mayor. And we had someone lined up to be the director of that, and that person chose to be the head of the state senate, so we lost that person. But I think the timing is past due, and it's time to do it.
Those organizations need to be grassroots, community-based organizations, and having someone step forward to help create something like that, the city can provide support to it, but we can't draft anyone. We can't create it ourselves
Right.
through council
But
action.
you'd be part of it.
We would be part of the process, and the council could be part of the
Right.
governing board.
I'll give one example, and then I'll get away from it. Raza Development Fund in Phoenix started with nothing and now has $384 million in their treasury and has helped raise over $6 billion nationally for Hispanic communities to upgrade workforce, affordable housing, outdoor recreation,
Infrastructure improvement.
the total ball of wax. And they are eligible for funding under a program I told you about a long time ago, Local Initiative Sport Corporation, one of the largest foundations in the world. I spent an hour on the phone with the assistant director in 2020, and there was no response from Prescott. They wanted to come here. We need a CDC. I'm glad to jump in, but it needs a full-time crew for that.
George, how specific do we want to get in the general plan? What I'm thinking of here is like in strategy 2.2, we talk about nonprofits, builders, and developers. Well, we know what a builder and developer is, but there's a lot of nonprofits out there. Do we want to sort of narrow that down ahead of time or wait on a case-by-case basis?
You can just fix that by putting the word related nonprofits.
That may be.
Coming in and talking about that kind of thing, but by putting just a simple word related, I don't know if you think that would work or not.
I'm thinking we need to narrow it down more because, you know, you get a brand-new nonprofit, oh, I want to go out and do this. They have no experience.
So this is specifically about housing and housing plan.
Yes.
So we could either put related or not-for-profit specializing in housing or something similar to that. I think, while the general plan needs to be general, the goals need to be something that we can clearly identify whether we're following through on them and accomplishing them. And that may mean more specificity in the strategies in order to verify that. So
I would agree with the word related on that because that gives us the ability to say, well, no, you don't really qualify on that. We also mentioned in there the potential sale of city property. Is there a lot of city property out there that's not being utilized?
not a lot. We have property that's available. A lot of our property is in small pieces that are probably not going to contribute a lot to development. They're slivers or remnants or pieces that were specifically acquired for something like a pump station. They're not very large. We do own some larger tracts, and we are, as you may have noticed, recent council action are acquiring some larger tracts of land that, while not appropriate for residential uses, could be for commercial uses or supporting uses that could support nearby commercial that may be in a good area.
Should we put something in there that if you have city property that can be used for residential, that it be geared primarily to workforce housing residential?
I think that's a possibility.
If I might, we interact with each other okay? Is
Sure,
that okay with you?
sure.
I don't need the microphone, I'll talk loud enough. I agree with you. Well, one of the things that's gonna come up is what Ralph has been talking about later. And that's gonna be, the city owns essentially a lot of open space. And that open space, some of it qualifies for, you could build housing there. So I think we need to make some distinctions as to what we're gonna say with city property. You don't want city property at, in the AED area that we have, the some odd acres that we're going to be getting to become partially workforce housing. So I think that what we need to do is we need to set aside those areas that are appropriate and not open space might be set aside as city property for workforce housing, that kind of thing.
I will look at it when the city decides to sell some land. Then if it's available for residential, then workforce housing should be one of the primary places there. If the city, we're not saying don't sell or sell the open space, but just,
And we do own a lot of property that's not open space. It's just not in large tracts
yeah.
for the most part.
And that works well for something like that. The other one I'm thinking of, we have a lot of residential, but you need more commercial to support the residential. Should there be incentives to rezone from residential to commercial? Should we put something like that in or not?
I don't think so for this reason. If you look at the land use map or the zoning map, either one, from a percentage balance thing, we have a lot of commercial property available. Problem we run into is in situations like Deepwell Ranch that has that bizarre master plan that you don't know what, sorry, I said that into the microphone, you don't know what uses could go in a particular area. They need supporting commercial in particular areas that are part of their master plan that's not necessarily going to follow a typical pattern of wherever you have a major crossroads, you have commercial. That's where you put commercial. That's where it works the best. That's a different situation than we have in most of the city. We have commercial corridors along most of our major roadways, already zoned commercial, partially developed as commercial. We have land use designations for commercial in areas that are currently residential but should be commercial. Willow Creek Road, think of some of the residential houses that literally back out of their driveway into 5 lanes of traffic. Those areas are probably better for future redevelopment to be commercial, and they're designated on the land use map already for those purposes. So I don't know that we need to create incentives for more commercial. The other problem with commercial is developing it depends on having a lot of residential nearby. Commercial businesses don't just show up and hope for houses to happen nearby. You have to have the houses first, and then the commercial comes. And it's been a problem with that.
Okay.
I know
Can we
we're,
go on to the
yeah.
next section, community connectiveness? Is that what's next?
It is.
So the Community Connected is a new section we added based on some of the discussions we've had and things we've seen. So what that includes is circulation, digital connectivity, cell towers, or other means, because there's a lot of other studies that have been gone on with the state in regards to Wi-Fi and internet connectivity. So it's not just cellular; it's any digital connectivity. Wildlife lasers. Wildlife corridors and open space, because that's all connectivity that we've been talking about. So, but the land use section will be part of that, how it'll be part of the puzzle as it's been put together.
Thank you.
This Jim McCarver, was that pulled from a different section of your general plan?
Not the existing general plan.
No, the connectiveness? All the strategies and goals are not in there?
It's a new concept. So the plan before had chapters that were specifically
No, I
out of
understand
state
that.
statutes and didn't
But like the
necessarily.
previous one was pulled from a lot of duplication from the general plan before. This section,
It's new.
okay.
Yeah. So one of the things we looked at is the concept of connectedness in the previous general plan was all in the transportation section. It was all about trails and roads. It wasn't necessarily about other kinds of connectiveness. So this is new.
Okay.
And I only have one goal and strategy. Additional goals and strategies would be appreciated.
Absolutely. I
with
think we're all ready to give you additional goals for this section.
Go for it.
All right, I'll start off. The one goal that you have for community connectiveness was promote preservation and maintenance of existing landscape trails and open spaces with neighborhoods to assure pedestrian circulation and access to existing open spaces. And then you have a couple of strategies for that. Well, connectedness, as Tammy just mentioned, it also includes roads and digital, and I think we need to have goals for that as well. My goal for goal number 2 would be promote cellular connectivity. And a couple of ideas I have is for strategy 2.1 would be designate suitable cell tower locations in new development. And 2.2, designate suitable cell tower locations on the land use map. This last cell tower that was on state land seemed like the perfect location for a new cell tower, yet the public was very much against it, and City Council, in response to the public response, was to deny the cell tower. We've got to say, hey, there are certain places that are suitable for cell towers, and they should be built if the cellular companies want to build them. And when the cell company is willing to spend $500,000 to put up a new tower, they don't just spend $500,000 because it's not needed. So,
And that's actually one of the concerns about having specific designated places, for instance, on a map, as opposed to description of appropriate places.
Yeah.
Cell towers belong on sites where there's existing infrastructure.
Right.
There's already been an impact on the land. Co-location with other
Right.
infrastructure. Things,
Yeah.
a
Water
description
tanks
like
and
that
such.
may be better than trying to designate
Sure.
spots on a map.
okay. So you're saying put those descriptions on what are appropriate locations,
Right.
not specific locations, but describe what an appropriate location would be like.
Right. High ground with already impacted infrastructure.
And
facilities.
Lois, let's get some input from Lois.
I'll tell you why those of us that voted no voted no. And this is why I actually don't agree with George, because I think our job is also to protect people's investments, and a home is a huge portion of that. And when you go into a home, let's look at those big green fields and yellow fields up north. One of the things is and I know of somebody who literally lives below the big giant Christmas tree way out on whatever. She has no problem. She knew it was zoned that way. She knew it was going to be in her backyard, and she bought the damn house anyhow because. Yeah. So there's people that have no problem with that, but we obviously heard from a ton of people who were like, wait a minute, you just changed the code. That was zoned this way. You're now putting something 80 to 100 foot high. I had no problem with 35 feet. I knew that was 35 feet. So I do think it's important that we put, because across these big open plains, they're going to want 80 to 100 feet. We know that. So let's plan it. Let's put in right now where commercial's going to be, or where water towers are going to be, or where, frankly, some of the county should be joining with us for them to do the same darn thing, because most of the people that wanted the tower are actually county residents, not city residents. And we should have a plan so that when you go to buy that land a few years from now, when it's not ranching anymore, it's about to be your home, you could say, oh, I don't want to be there with that in my backyard. I'm going to go down the road a little bit. Right now, we haven't given people that, and then they show up in protests. So for me, it's like, I would love to see a plan, and we did talk at the city council meeting. Our vision is, call it 5 years from now, wherever you live in the city, if you go to call 911, your cell phone is going to work. So we do need a plan.
Right. Absolutely.
So
We can't do that with this
that could
plan.
be-
That's a goal.
Okay, right, that's a goal.
Yeah, that's a
Right.
goal.
Yes. And also, to add to what Lois just said, also, when a new development goes through the planning stages, one of the questions of the developer needs to be, where are your designated cell tower locations in your new development? And is that going to provide adequate cell coverage for the houses that you're planning to build?
So one of the problems we may run into with that is that we don't choose where the cell towers go. The cell companies get to choose that.
True.
So if we have certain criteria that we can establish, like here's an optional location within each of the subdivisions that come through, that still leaves the cell tower companies, the cell companies, an opportunity to say, well, I'm going to put it in that subdivision, or I'm going
Right.
to put it in that subdivision.
They want the
But
most
they're
effective
marked
location.
out.
Right.
We wouldn't necessarily guarantee
Right.
one in any particular subdivision.
Right, because they want to build a tower that's going to cover a larger area instead of 3 towers that are going to cover smaller areas.
At least for now. The technology is changing, and before long, I anticipate cell companies coming to us asking us to put streetlights in so that they can attach their antennas to them. I think that's a possibility in the future. The big towers will eventually be large regional towers that are connected to street side antennas that are going to be on smaller poles.
Right.
Yes, go ahead and say it.
OTARD.
OTARD. Yes. And
What is it? What is it?
The acronym spells OTARD. It's an
OTARD?
over-the-air reception device.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a fun word to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those
You
antennas
have to
that
say
go
with
on to
enthusiasm. Yeah.
those antennas that go onto the street lights and street signs and such. Those
Street
are
lights, traffic signal.
also known
posts,
as.
Yes.
Hate to say it, but that's known as 5G.
5G
6G is
technology
coming out
makes
too.
that work better, but
Right.
you can actually do it with 4G technology.
And we can't prohibit it per state.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Intervene on that one,
But-
saying that we can't prevent those in the right
The-
way.
But we
They
do know
just
that there's
haven't-
going to be a lot of public resistance. I don't understand why, but there's a lot of resistance to 5 and 6G.
Technology hasn't quite got there where it's easier to do multiples of the small ones than it is to do 1 or 2 of the larger ones. So we're sort of in a transition.
And the thing
period.
about 5G is that almost everybody has Wi-Fi in their home. That is 5G. It's the same frequency
Technology?
band as 5G.
Did not know
So
that.
If you are uncomfortable with 5G, you need to throw away your Wi-Fi router that's in your house.
I
So,
tell you, it causes hair loss.
yeah, right.
Well, one of the things that we can do is maybe a combination of the two. So as Councilwoman Fruworth mentioned, designating specific areas where we anticipate and would prefer to see cell coverage infrastructure go in is a possibility. One of the things we would have to do, though, is to identify places, preferably high ground locations where you've got some elevation, and we can do that. We have the information available for us to come back and show you. Oh yeah, of the whole city. I can.
You'll go see it, but you-
I can show you where the highest ground is in all of the areas where we anticipate future development.
So George, a strategy then for under 2.0 would be strategy 1 at least is to evaluate and map out future areas for new technology. I wasn't aware of these short things that go on poles. Public doesn't know that. That should be a strategy in there.
They can go on poles or buildings. A lot of downtowns have them attached to structures and you don't see them.
Then we don't need microchips.
It works in some cases, but it's coming technology. It's not here.
This may not be appropriate in this section. It's more of an overall statement. But when I read through this, I kept thinking about my misspent youth, where my boss said, "Who am I going to fire or promote if this doesn't get done, or if it does get done?" So my point or my suggestion is to somehow tighten this up some, and put who's going to do it. Community development will conduct a study. Building grounds will do blah blah blah. To bring it together so that it's a more cohesive, more concise, not tactical, but encroaching on.
So Tammy's talked to the committee a number of times about an implementation section or chapter that's going to be part of the plan. What we anticipate based on early conversations with you, a spreadsheet or a matrix of all of the goals and strategies with who's responsible for them and the timeframes identified so that we can follow through on them. But it may be that we compile them all into a single chapter rather than identify within each of the written chapters. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It just seemed ambiguous.
Yeah.
I put myself in, because I am the public, okay, and because I'm going to be voting on this, I kept thinking, well,
Yeah.
these are just
Who does this
pie in
apply
the
to?
sky,
Right.
you know. Yeah, and I said, no, I want to know who's going to do this, and when.
And how come it's not done? One of the things, just kidding. One of the things to point out is that you're going to need to be a little specific with the cellular situation because we already have in general plans currently and in the past that co-locating cell towers with existing locations and with water tanks and city-owned property is something that the general plan has already encouraged, and that's not sufficient to be able to address all the concerns of the community. So we need to get something else in there, something with a little bit more teeth, and give the cell companies the opportunity. If they're going to make these investments, we have to make sure that we're giving them good information.
Ted?
Certainly.
I think we've seen in recent history that just about anything the planning commission or the city council entertains has a group of people in the room where the idea is rejected. Now, what you're doing is, and you've done a pretty good job of, is you represent all 47,000 people in the city of Prescott. A lot of times when it comes to the planning commission or to the city council, there's 50 people in the room that doesn't want whatever somebody's proposed. You can't make this legally binding. And I think that, that's something that Ralph worked on in the beginning. And I supported that because think of the situation. 11 really smart people spend 3 years to put this all together, gaining input from residents across the city. They put together a general plan. It goes out to the voters. They vote on it. Yep, we agree. And when they're agreeing, inside that general plan, to your point, they're probably not reading it, is things like affordable housing, now workforce housing. If they don't read that, they just, it looks good. So 84% of the people vote for it. And then when a developer sees, okay, that property there on Willow Creek and Pioneer Parkway, that should be rezoned from residential to business general, and he reads that and proposes a mini storage, then everybody's heads blow off and they say, no, we don't want that. So I think if you can't make it legally binding, kudos to Ralph for trying. You mentioned specificity. I think specificity has to be in there. It has to say, look, we need cell phone towers, and I think the 5G is repeaters, right, that they put on telephone poles? Something like, yeah. Safety trumps aesthetics every day of the week. So if a person can't get a 911 call out, that trumps the fact that the cell phone tower is ugly, which would be co-located next to an ugly water tank, which would be also next to an ugly chain link fence and probably a shed. Somehow, I mean, I'm making it brutally honest, but somehow that verbiage needs to be in there so people know that you've processed that idea and you're saying there's the priority for workforce housing. This is the priority for cell phone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you.
Ralph?
Yeah, Ralph Hess. I'm looking again at the first paragraph of the section under community connectedness, the last sentence of that first paragraph. It means open space trails and wildlife corridors providing meaningful connections to our natural environment. But none of the goals or strategies that are stated here include wildlife corridors.
So right now we're just talking about land use. That's a different section. of the chapter. So we're not looking at the whole chapter yet. This is just looking at land use, wildlife corridors, and open space are different categories. That'll be looked at separately with their own goals and strategies.
Well, then maybe, again, Ralph Hess, maybe then what we've got down here below as goal number 1 is to assure pedestrian circulation access to existing open spaces. You might want to include something there, even if it's going to be a different section, since it's already referenced in this part of the proposal. So if you're going to be referencing here in the proposal, I'm thinking the goals and strategies should match the text that's at the above. So even if it's going to be more detailed in a different section, then you could even make reference to the other section. But for continuity and consistency, I think it needs, what's referenced in the text has to be reflected in the goals and strategies.
I tend to agree with that, Ralph.
Consider a
but
separate?
Let me ask Ralph a question first.
Okay.
I very nicely said, shut up, George.
I understood that better.
I think so. Ralph, a question for you. One of the concerns that I would have would be the unintended consequences of putting in wildlife corridors in that area. I mean, if we put wildlife corridors in there, since number one, we don't know where they all are, one of the issues that might come up is a group saying that there is a wildlife corridor for antelope going through this particular area. So therefore, the area that is zoned for residential property and workforce housing can't have workforce housing there because there is a wildlife corridor there. And so I'm wondering if the unintended consequence of putting that in here might be preventing something that we're trying to accomplish in other areas of the plan. What are your thoughts on that?
The Ralph Hess, I don't think so, because this is not specifying which places those are going to be. This is just identifying that this is a goal and strategy to address wildlife corridors. It's not identifying where they're going to be.
We got it covered.
All right.
Okay. All right, so we've talked about cell towers and wildlife. How about the connectivity of roads? Anybody have comments on that? Because we don't have a goal on that yet.
Because that's a different section.
Yeah, sorry. So one more explanation. Well, one of the things that we started doing with housing is to bring you pieces of each of these that might affect a particular section. And I started writing the land use section before the committee agreed to create these chapters. So I went back and broke up the parts that I had done and created additional parts that touch some of these associated with land use. What you're going to be getting for future review will be an entire section that will have transportation goals and strategies and text related to one of these, and land use, and open space, and economic development. Each of them identified within each of these chapters as to how they benefit that chapter or how they affect that chapter. So the goals and strategies that I provided in this are just that narrow focus of land use, but there are others that are coming. And when you see a draft of the first element that comes before you, the first chapter that comes before you, it's going to have a bunch of different former elements in it.
And well, I think that there's a lot, you're absolutely correct. And I think that there's a lot of stuff that there's going to be overlaps between these different areas. And I'm tending to agree with the chairman in thinking that there needs to be something addressing the interconnectedness, not just of trails, but particularly in between subdivisions. 2 subdivisions being done by developers so that you can have things like circulation, access for emergency services, for people who have to evacuate an area. There needs to be that interconnectiveness between roadways and circulation for a variety of different transportation means. Multimodal access. How's that sound? That's a nice word.
Pretty long. We've got it, though.
Getting into $10 words now. Okay. And also, just like the cell towers, when a new development is being proposed, besides asking the developer, how do you plan for cellular coverage in your new development? Another question is, how do you plan to develop for emergency access and also emergency evacuation.
Got that covered too.
Okay,
Good deal. Thank you.
okay. All right, next, what was the next topic you have for us? Great places.
Yeah.
Point of order.
Okay, go ahead. Ralph?
Ralph Hess. This is going to be taking quite a while. And Joe Baines is here for what's the last agenda item, which I think is going to be short. So I asked the chair if we could interrupt this presentation to take up the last agenda item, talking about the charter amendment regarding
Is that
open
okay
space,
with you guys?
so that Mr. Baines can go about his business.
I have no objection if anyone, unless anyone else does. All right.
So
We want to jump to,
D, it's item D.
yep, okay, we're going to jump to item D and then come back to where we were.
To go to the big table.
Yeah.
So I worked with Ralph to put this together. This shows all of our open space properties across the city. Each of them has, there's another attachment here that talks about, shows the parcel numbers of each one of them, what they are, and then basically each one refers back to that sheet. So this gives you a comprehensive use of all the open space in the city of Prescott. Some are already in the charter. Acker Park and the lakes, I think, were in the charter.
Yes, Ralph Hess. The lakes and the Acker Park are both protected in perpetuity under Articles 8, Section 12, which is in our packet. And what Mr. Baines is showing us here is, as I understand it, there are about 25 parcels of open space that are owned by the city that I sent out a list of those earlier, and it's not in the packet, but the 25, or is it? Is it in here?
You just handed that to me today.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm not complaining about it.
IT has available to it.
Oh, okay.
Number 4, I believe.
Joe, I can't read the.
Yeah. Maybe, and also for the purpose of the public and cameras, maybe we can just overlay it onto one of the other maps and you can kind of point out what's what.
I have the old list.
And if the IT's there, there's a one, the last attachment under this meeting, if there's anybody there. Oh, sorry.
Okay, what we did is,
Preliminary list.
Ralph, we jumped ahead just so that Joe can give his thing and leave.
So Tammy, did you say this is in, if we've got somebody in IT? Okay. Well, each of these, for example, A is the Watson Woods Preserve, so it's referenced on our sheet here. B is the Peavine Trail, which is here. So each one of them, ironically, A through Z. So however many letters are in the alphabet, that's how many parcels we have here. And so I think the intent of this, well, for me, I've been wanting to update this anyway because last year, as most of you know, we acquired some property in Glassford Hill. The Storm Ranch and the AED were pretty recent. So I wanted to have something updated, but also Ms. McMinn and Ralph Hess were asking about this for the purpose of the general plan and the charter review. So that's what this document is. Each piece is referenced in the map, has parcel numbers, and we've also put the cost of acquiring those. Some were donated, but anyway, this is not in their packet, though?
No.
Okay. Make a lot more sense if it is. Yeah, no problem. But anyway, for your consideration, these are the open space parcels that we owned. We don't have a reference here to Pioneer Park because that's leased from BLM, so we don't own that outright. But the rest of these are outright owned by the city of Prescott.
Do you have a guesstimate the total acreage?
Yes, 3,686 in this map. And again, it doesn't include the 1,100 acres at Pioneer Park.
Okay. Rod?
So these are spaces the city owns that happen to be open, or are they spaces that were acquired as natural open space?
A little bit of both. Some of them predated the 2001 sales tax that covered open space purchases. So some happened prior to that. But these are all parcels, whether they were acquired with open space monies or not, that have been identified as open space or park properties in the city's plans.
Thank you.
No plans to develop, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair. Ralph Hess. Yeah, to give you a little bit of context for this, Bonnie McMahon and I are both on the Charter Review Committee. And what our intention to do this Monday is to present to the Charter Review Committee the idea of protecting in perpetuity all of this open space. And just as it is with the Acker Park and with the Watson, actually Watson and Willow Lakes have more than just protecting the lakes for in perpetuity, because they're also to be used, those reservoirs are also intended to be used as a water resource in the event that the city needs it. Acker Park is just open space park land that's protected in perpetuity. And what we're going to be proposing and looking for the general plan committee just to support it, not really any type of action, but hopefully be behind it, is to protect all of this open space from being sold in perpetuity. And so, and that in the city charter. And so, which again has to be voted on by the public. So they would have to approve it. Committee would have to approve it. Council would have to approve it. And so that's the background and why we asked Mr. Baines to go ahead and put together this list of property and put together the map, and very graciously did that. We're thankful for that.
A question I have for Ralph or Joe is, was any of this land acquired with the intention of, at some future time, the city selling it or developing the land, or was it intended to be open space?
It was all intended to be open space. Some's more active than others, like Willow and Watson Lake. Not only are they a water supply, but they're also more active recreation. But to answer your question, Mr. Sapio, yes, they were all acquired with the idea that they would remain open space.
Okay, and if that was the intent, then I think that where your the city charter committee is headed is probably appropriate. If that was the original intent, was to keep it as open space.
And again, there's some processes that it'll have to go through in the charter review and council and all that. But yep, this is a comprehensive list of all the open space properties in the city of Prescott.
So, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
One of the things that's extremely crucial that I've shared with Joe and other people, a master plan from another state, exactly how to make this work. But what needs to go into this general plan and the goals is how to maintain this and who's going to maintain it. And that has to be well thought out for the future. Otherwise, we have all this land and nobody taking care of it.
I'll be ready for the booze on this.
This is not for the general plan, this is for the charter.
I know.
So this is a different conversation, not.
Well,
the
but we're,
general plan. Yeah.
this is part of Ralph's question. Even the thinnest pancake has two sides, okay? And if the sustainability of this city requires that the city takes very deliberate action and breaks the paradigm to create the things that we need desperately to keep this city sustainable, then maybe it's not the right answer to dedicate everything here into perpetuity.
Tom, I couldn't agree with you more. But I think there's a question of unintended consequences that comes up here, and that to put it into a charter amendment that we need to do something, I mean, that's going to require a vote of the citizens of the city, and that's going to take an awful long time to be able to get something through. Now, the utilization of open space for anything other than recreation, I mean, there's a lot of sense to that, but I can easily see some of these places in open space where a police substation, a fire station, you know, those kinds of things might be needed in the future. You don't know. I would say that there needs to be some very strong language somewhere that protects this as open space and makes it difficult for the city to go off and sell it so that I can build a high rise. But I don't think you want to make it so that you don't want to cut off your nose to spite your face in this one. So that's where I'm standing on this.
Any other comments? I think that Tom has got a very good point. I think Ralph does too, because when this land was acquired under the premise that it's open space, that's a promise made. Putting it into the charter to protect it is a promise kept. But at the same time, we have to watch out for, like Tom said, unintended consequences. And if we need a police station or a fire station, and the city needs that, and this is city land, then it would make sense that if that's the best location, then that land also be available for something that the city needs. So I don't know how you dance around that bush.
I think the principal process I think that Ralph is talking about is making sure the city doesn't sell it because they suddenly decide that we need some money and open space isn't that important.
Absolutely.
So fire stations and police stations, if they really need to be located somewhere in a little corner of one of those open spaces, isn't going to take much land. And I can't imagine that would be a total objectionable situation.
Oh, absolutely. I would strongly be in favor of that as well, that when the city acquires land for a specific purpose, that they don't sell it so for some other purpose. And same thing with the land that's being purchased around the airport to protect the airport. That land, once it's purchased, should never be sold. It should always be city property. So. You don't. Don disagrees, but I mean, when it's purchased for a purpose, it should stay for that purpose, and it should be city property for that purpose. But unless it would, right, for protection.
There are ways to protect.
Whether you're protecting the airport or protecting open space,
right?
It should be
understood
under the city's control as city property.
But city control can be done with things more than just ownership. You can apply deed restrictions and things like that to when you sell property to limit what someone else can do so that you protect the airport.
That would be another way to do it.
If I could ask Ralph a question.
I was just going to say there's some other wording that might be suggested would be for open space or a public purpose, which could be a fire station, a police station.
That's a good suggestion.
And for Ralph, did you anticipate just getting a consensus, or do you want the committee to vote on support of this? I'm just thinking about moving it forward. We've heard, I guess, those folks who have a...
This is Ralph Hess. It's not agendized for a vote. It's only agendized for discussion. So this has been very helpful. One of the intentions was to get input from the General Plan Committee members so as to have an idea of what the concerns might be when the Charter Review Group meets on Monday. So this input has been very valuable. Yeah. So I appreciate it. Any other
Where's
comment?
Mr. McCarver? Where is this going? Is this eventually end up with the council the committee will advise or recommend this to the council to make this change in the city charter?
Well, that's yet to be seen, but on Monday, and I don't even know if we'll take a vote on Monday, but if the charter review group decides to go ahead and recommend it to the council, then it'll go to the council.
Right.
And also, the legal department, the city's legal department attends our meetings. One of the members from the legal department, one of the attorneys is always there. They'd be involved with drafting the actual language if it does move forward to the council, and then the council would decide whether they want to put it on the ballot. And
well, if you're looking for opinions from individually from us, then I would agree totally with you. I think it should be left as open space,
right,
not carved out for this or that. I think that was the intent with the original money, the taxation that acquired the money to buy these things.
Right. I appreciate it. Any other comments?
Go ahead, Andre.
I would agree with the Toms about the
As opposed to the gyms.
yes, the Toms about the for the open space or other public purpose. I like the flexibility.
All right. Great.
Do you want to at least give Ralph a consensus to take back to the charter committee? That we think that the land should be protected as open space or other public purpose.
All right.
I agree with that little bit of added flexibility.
Right.
All right. Ralph has good input. Thank you very much. Joe, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks.
So, Chairman, instead of going back, because I think we got a lot of great input, so we have an idea of where you guys are going with the general plan. So instead of going back to the land use section, we're taking your comments and your thoughts, because I understand where you guys are all going with these, and bring you back the chapters. So where this is going to be fitted into the puzzle, because it is a big puzzle, what we're doing right now. And these are little pieces of the puzzle. So as this is put together, next month, you're going to have a chapter, the economic competitiveness and prosperity. So where this is at, and then you're gonna be able to see how it's all gonna kind of flow together and how it interrelates to each other, and where the goals and strategies, how it's all fitting together. I think it might make a lot more sense than trying to think of outside these separately, because we want to get to the major plan amendment, because that way we can bring that forward and get that done as a discussion as it's given to fore.
Okay.
And as you guys get your comments, any comments you have in regards to the goals and strategies that you have, either leave them on the sheets that I gave you, or you can email them to me. So, but you will review these again as it is integrated into the chapters. And I think it'll make a lot more sense and be a little bit easier to comment on. Because I understand trying to address open space and transportation when it's not all together, it's kind of hard to comment on.
Okay, so this is the last thing we have to cover is item C
Yep.
on the agenda, and that's the major plan amendments.
Yes. Since we're talking about
Wait, just a second. JD?
I just wanted to ask a question. For the people in the public who are viewing these sessions, if they want to send in any comments, are they allowed to? Do they address them to Tammy?
That's encouraged.
And how is it more helpful for the committee that they send them in now than that they wait until the written document?
Sooner the better.
So all this is part of the packet. All these chapters are part of the packet, and I have a very extensive email list that I send this out to. So it's not just, and so anybody who wants to be part of the email list, go to the planprescott.com website and register. There's where you can put your email in to hit register, and I get your email and then gets on the list. And Then there's also an email that people can send comments to at any time, and we get comments all the time, sometimes at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night.
Yep. We always welcome public input,
They're fun to read on Monday
even
morning.
at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. So the reason why we also brought the major plan amendment, because the land use map is what triggers major plan amendments. So we have our zoning map here. So say this is a state trust land. So this is a kind of a checkerboard area out here. We wanted to kind of define that we have state land department and we have Deep Well Ranch parcels that are not part of the city right now. So we have other areas that can be annexed. We have this Prescott Valley, looks like they created an island here, hopefully unintentionally, as well as other areas. So as we move forward and annex properties that could potentially be annexed into the city, and so there's to have to create criteria for major plan amendments. So when the Growing Smarter legislator was enacted, major plan amendments are only heard once a year. So that all big projects that are coming forward to the city, you're looking at them at one time, usually at the end of the year, and they're all heard at one time. State changed that. I think it was last year, the year before, where major plan amendments can be heard any time of year, just like a minor. So it kind of took out that effectiveness of it, as us older planners were kind of opposed to that because it kind of defeated a Growing Smarter legislature. But they kept the time frame. So you still have the 60-day review period. We still have to send it out to all the surrounding jurisdictions and get their input and everything. That part didn't change, just the time when it can be heard. So in your packet, we have what the criteria is of what triggers a major plan amendment. And I know there's some concerns about this is kind of difficult to understand. But if you look at the chart, basically if it's 40 acres or more in size and there's 400 or more homes within an area, so if we look at these checkerboard areas, say the state land department wants to come in, there's kind of houses now at Deep Well here, so some, but if a part came in, so we have this one coming in. Right now this is being proposed as part of the negotiations for the airport. So we have a piece of church here. Even though it meets the acreage, there's not enough homes in the area to trigger a major plan amendment. It would be a minor to expand, to change it from agricultural to mixed use probably. But it doesn't trigger the major plan. So do we want to change what would trigger a major plan amendment? Do we want to make it more difficult to do a major plan amendment? And I gave you examples from other jurisdictions in your packet of what it could look like. But right now we're asking for the categories, what would trigger a major plan amendment? Do you want to look at the acreage? And then some of these like Prescott Buckeye, theirs was 160 acres, which is pretty common. And what happened was in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, we had a lot of solar projects starting to come through and wind farms, which take big acreage. So a lot of the jurisdictions went in and changed the criteria for major plan amendments to require larger acreage. I know the county did that. They changed it to 1,000 acres would require because they're trying to accommodate these solar projects possibly coming in, which they never did at the county. So that's what we're asking you today, is that we understand trying to make it simpler possibly, and we'll look at doing that, look at the other jurisdictions, but we want to kick in what's the acreage requirements? Do you want to make it harder to change the general plan map? Or do we have the flexibility to be able to review them as they come through based on what we have now, if that makes sense?
And right now, the way it is, has it ever been necessary to do a major change to the general plan map?
No.
Okay, that's what I figured. Okay. So what you're really asking is, do we want this major amendment to the general plan map easier to trigger, leave it the way it is, or make it more difficult to trigger?
Or change the criteria. So there's basically two criteria. How many people are nearby that are going to be impacted by it, and how big is it?
Right.
So the bigger it is, the further out we look to see how many people are going to be impacted by it, but the smaller number of people, because generally you've got larger traffic.
I noticed that, for example, for 40 acres, it's a small change, so it requires 400 or more homes within a quarter mile of
Right.
the area that you're trying to change.
The anticipation was that's more of an infill change to an area that's already developing, as opposed to the prospective annexation at the very north end of the city, where quite literally no one is within the radius that we look for or the number of homes.
So that would
It's
not
zero.
trigger it. However, something that is as large as 640 acres, which is a square mile, then it only takes 50 or more homes within a quarter mile of that to trigger the change, because a square mile is pretty big.
And because it's obviously a very rural area if you have properties that large. So now you have potential for having a real adverse impact on fewer people, but it's the same scale of impact as you would have in a smaller area on more people. So that's how this came about in the first place, along with the additional list of A through C in the prior section of that just talks about generally the types of development that we're looking at. And of course, certain types of text amendments might trigger it as well. And again, we've specified those.
Well, okay, who wants to start? I think everybody's going to have an opinion. Rod, let's go around the table.
So this may be a harder question to answer, but would you say that it's never happened because nobody really ever wanted such a major change, or because it would have been too hard to get it approved?
It's a little of both. One of the reasons it hasn't happened is that many of the more intensive changes have been on much smaller properties. So now we're looking for a larger number of people who are adversely impacted.
Yeah.
Or they're very large properties, like the annexation of Deepwell Ranch or the more recent annexation of AED, where there aren't any development, neighboring developments with residential uses in them that were impacted by them. So it's because of that scale difference that we haven't had one. If it's very large property, it tends to be very north end of Prescott, away from all of the existing development.
Okay, good. Just going around the table. Any other comments coming this way? Ralph?
Well, two things. Ralph has two things. One, I'm looking at the ARS section 461.06G, and I'm not finding what is set forth here in that language.
So that section of the statute says that each municipality has to adopt the definition. It doesn't say what the definition is.
Right.
So we have to choose the definition, and our first effort back in 2001 was to adopt this definition.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that this 40 acres is not in the statute.
No.
Okay, and so as I've stated before, since there's never been a major amendment in the city of Prescott, I'm suggesting this needs to be amended. We have to have a
I'm
different.
not sure I follow the logic of just because it hasn't happened, it doesn't work.
Well, I'm suggesting that if there's never been anything that fit within this category that requires more scrutiny, then we have to have something that requires more scrutiny. And one of the reasons is this land use map that we've been talking about today is really the only thing that's enforceable in the general plan.
Yeah, pretty much.
And when the voters approve the general plan, they're approving this land use map, which is the only thing that's enforceable. And so, as I stated in previous meetings, I'm asserting that anytime there's a change in the land use map, that should be a major amendment. And so what I had suggested with regard to amending the 2015 provision regarding major amendment is that two things should constitute a major amendment. Any change in the land use map and any change in the general plan text amendments that change existing guiding principles, goals, or strategies. Anytime that that occurs or is proposed by a developer or any landowner, that should be considered a major amendment.
Respectfully, don't agree on that. If we did that, someone who's in the county right now has 5 acres and wants to come into the city with his house and so forth, has to go to a public vote. Right now, it comes to planning and zoning. Now, to me, it's not the size of the annexation, it's the people who are important on this. My concern with we have here, what would keep a developer from saying, okay, let's see, I got about 100 homes here, so I want to take 160 acres, get that in. Then on the other side of that, I'll do another 160 acres and so forth, and not have to go through a major development or a vote on this. You know, I have concern that they will try to go around it. And we've seen that in planning and zoning where a developer is supposed to do one thing, but say, well, I just want to take this little part out of my land and I won't get that zone in the city. So therefore, I don't have to do this. And I have concern of getting around the purpose of the program out there.
So just, I understand what you're saying. Manipulating to avoid consequences can be done legally or illegally, morally or immorally. There obviously those things can happen. One point of clarification, major plan amendments don't go to the voters. Major plan amendments go through a much longer process, and the original purpose of the state law was to assure that major amendments all happened at the same time so that the cities, the decision makers, the planning agency, which is Planning Commission, and the city councils of each of these cities looked at all of them at once to see the impacts that were going to occur on the community. They watered it down terribly, in my opinion. I agree with Tammy. Most planners didn't like the way the state watered it down by saying you can come in anytime with a major amendment. And anytime during that process, we have to process a major amendment. There's a lot of staff work, there's a lot of committee work on the form of the Planning Commission, and there's a lot of council work with each major amendment. It takes time and it takes money, because time is money. So the state watered it down by not requiring all of them occur at one time when we could process them all at one time and save Planning Commission, save council, and save staff time to clump them together. It's my word for the day is clump them together. Now we have to take them as they come through, and you get them and spend time on them, spend the public's money on them each time they come through. So my only concern for what Ralph is talking about is that that could increase the number of those and therefore cost more public time and money. And we have a lot of other projects that we work on that this will sap time away from city staff dealing with maybe more mundane but more immediate issues like processing permits and doing the things that we do for commission action on rezonings and things like that. So I have a concern about making it too hard that everything triggers it, but if we haven't triggered one so far, then maybe we need to look at whether we're focused enough, whether we need to maybe shorten that down and trigger it more often, but not every time.
Looking at some of the, George, looking at some of the examples that you provided in the agenda packet, Buckeye, for example, anything over 160 acres triggers a major amendment. For Payson, establishment of a new or the deletion of a requirement for a planned arterial or collector roadway, in our case, that would be Sundog Connector, would trigger a major plan amendment. For Prescott Valley, they have 320 acres. For Scottsdale, they have a chart that goes from one category to another category, and it says whether it's major or minor. For Gilbert, they said 160 acres. So different cities have had, I guess, different ideas of how easily or how difficult it should be to trigger a major plan amendment. From the planning department's perspective, because you work with this every day, how do you feel the major plan definition that the city of Prescott has worked for you? Do you think it's too lax? Do you think that it needs to be changed, or does it work? Has it worked well for you?
That's an interesting question. Because we haven't had anything come in to trigger a major amendment, it's hard for me to tell you how we would have handled a major amendment. But one of the reasons why we haven't had one triggered is because we looked at the impacts on existing development as the key trigger for it. So if you look at the matrix we created, depending on how many acres versus how many homes nearby, that's specifically intended to protect those existing neighbors or neighborhoods. In doing the research way back in 2001, and again, Tammy did the research for the packet today, we looked at what other cities were doing, and it's split. Most of them use some acreage criteria like we do as triggers, acreage categories or a matrix similar to what we did. The numbers of which acreage triggered which amounts is all over the place. So from my perspective, the way we've set it up works. The criteria for acreage or the criteria for the number of homes that are within a certain radius and potentially impacted by that major amendment may be what you want to adjust. I don't know that the way we do it is the way we have it set up is wrong. I think maybe if you're looking at anything, look at how many acres trigger it.
Let me ask another way. Have there been any projects that you've worked where you thought this should have been a major change?
Yes.
Okay. That answers,
There were several.
Okay. So that's a big thing right
They
there.
didn't trigger the criteria.
It didn't, but you felt
they
that
were
it should have.
Impactful enough on nearby.
It should have. Okay. So in those instances, and I don't want to get into what plans, what projects they were specifically, what do you think would have helped you in the planning department to say, this should have been a trigger because this really should have been a major plan amendment?
Another way to ask the question, what specifically was it that bothered you about particular changes that you thought should have been a major amendment?
It was the number of residential properties that were going to be impacted by it. It was the fact that they didn't meet the number trigger in our matrix, but there were certainly going to be impacts on properties, fairly significant impacts on properties.
So if you were to change the definition, then how would you change the definition so that, like, how many properties impacted, and how would you describe that to put it into the general plan?
Well,
You did it.
I should have had a better. I'm not stumped yet. There may be another way to address it that might effectively do what concerned me, and that is, we've picked a quarter-mile radius as the radius for determining adverse impact. It's a quarter mile by our definition. If it were a half mile, it would have affected those two developments differently. So maybe it's the It's the circle we draw that would be more effectively changed than the number of acres or the number of homes.
So you'd recommend going to a half mile, maybe?
Didn't recommend anything. well, here. So here, from my perspective, the issue is this: the fact that we haven't triggered a major amendment, I don't see as a deficiency in the definition. I see it as an indicator of where development's occurring. Most of our major development, almost all of our major development that has big impacts on properties has been in the north part of town where there's huge tracts of nearly empty as far as homes go property. So we haven't developed far enough where we would trigger a major amendment in those areas because there is not enough already existing development. That's substantially changing with the development in Deepwell Ranch. There's going to be enough homes in Deepwell Ranch in the near future to trigger anything 160 acres or larger if it's in close proximity to the airport or if it's in close proximity to Deepwell Ranch in that area. The number of homes keep increasing in that area, and therefore the criteria keeps changing. So I'm not sure I'm advocating changing it, but if you were to change it, I would go for the half-mile radius as proposed by Don Michaelman, as moved by Don Michaelman. No, I'm sorry.
How does the rest of the committee feel about that, changing it from a quarter mile to a half mile?
I think that's a good idea.
You should pass the microphone around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, should we just get a raise of hands? How many people were comfortable with half a mile?
Yeah, let's.
You want to continue discussion first? Okay. All right.
Good stuff. A lot of making these decisions is to get out your Ouija board and try to figure out what may or may not happen. And to say that it just might happen within the area north is not the real issue. I mean, like you said, that's if there's no houses out there and somebody decides I want to do this instead of that, big deal. Make your decisions, say what you want to say, come in, go through the regular amendments that you need to go through. There's already a very extensive process in place for that if nobody else is impacted. The other thing is that you have to take a look at what happens if, by way of example, the along Highway 89 and Prescott Lakes Parkway, okay, there's some space out there that is undeveloped, quite a bit of it actually. So what if somebody comes in and says, I want to do this instead of that, which is a major plan amendment, then yes, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be affected by that, and that's where we need to be able to have the criteria. And I don't mind a half mile, a criteria in there of when a major amendment kicks in. One of the reasons that you want to avoid having to do a major amendment is by us doing some good thinking about what happens, particularly in that green area I keep talking about, up to the north area. If we can say what we'd like to see happen there with any kind of relevance, then I think the idea of a major amendment in that area is going to be pretty nil if we make some good decisions now. So I think that whatever we decide here, and just changing to the half mile, in my opinion, is fine. I mean, if that's the only thing that's broke, let's just fix that. And I think that that's probably appropriate. But one of the things that this does for me is it says that if there is going to be a change, that's because we didn't do something right the first time or because we didn't think it all the way through as best as we could have. And to address Ralph's issue of any change, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Don't want your hands tied that much so that it has to be that kind of a thing for any change to the plan. Absolutely no. You need to have some criteria in there and some flexibility in the plan. If the plan's not going to have flexibility, it's not a general plan. It's an edict.
Well said. We're doing a 10-year plan. We're looking in the crystal ball. What do we expect? I mean, we live in a very dynamic world. Okay, do we expect things to be stagnant, or do we just expect them to be very dynamic and fluid? So the question that I would ask is what do we expect to happen, and do we need less flexibility, the same flexibility, or more flexibility based on what we think is going to happen over the next 10-year period. And to get hung up in the how many acres or is irrelevant at this time. What we really need to understand is what do we expect is going to happen and what gives the city the best opportunity to effectively address those changes. More, less, or none, or the same.
Sandra Carmen, I like more flexibility, so I would agree with the half mile in this situation.
That's Tom. That's the Tom's mic.
Those are the
Jim McCarver.
Tom's.
So, this is maybe a well-known
off this microphone.
well-known knowledge, but what happens if somebody? What are the consequences if you go outside the rules with the major plan amendment? Does it cancel the project, or do they?
Actually, what happens is you apply to us for a major amendment to the general plan. And we look at the criteria that have been adopted, and in the future, whatever new criteria are adopted. And if you don't meet those criteria, we don't process you. I will give you your $30,000 check back. And that's it.
End of development, basically. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think that's unreasonable.
Or they could develop under the criteria that doesn't trigger a major amendment and not have to go through the process. So scale down the development, modify the development, something else.
So I think the other question, you'd mentioned that there have been instances where people sort of wiggled around the law, the requirements, and did that change, force them to change their plans so that it was a more appropriate development? Their spirit of the law is they're ignoring, or the letter of the law. The spirit is they're just working around it.
That's hard to answer.
Yeah, I'm sure that's pretty vague. I think I'm on board with the half mile radius.
Jim Huffman, I understand the geometric argument, losing my voice, and how it relates to the map, because that's really what we have to rely on. However, we're spending years talking about what we think is important. Ralph mentioned that pretty directly. We have goals, we have strategies, and to completely ignore those and simply base it on a geometric factor bothers me to no end. What is the solution that leaves the flexibility that we need? I don't know. But somehow, this thing, major amendments, need to have a relationship to the major goals that we assign. So that's really, I don't have a solution to that right now, but I think it's got to be there more than just, geometry. Anyway, that's.
So to answer part of that, the existing major amendment definition does include things like text amendments that change guiding principles in the plan. So there's some, it covers more than that, but it talks about major changes to goals that change the guiding principles and things like that. The intent there was to address part of what you're looking at, and that is that it's not just a geography question, that sometimes it's more than that. And that is certainly something we tried to address with the original definition.
I'll probably get something thrown at me, but 2015, 2017, something bad happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it cost a lot of money. I'll leave it at that.
So, Jim, how do you feel about the half mile?
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We haven't heard from Gary.
I totally agree with Jim Huffman. I think that was well said. I'm not going to vote yes or no for a half mile. I'm going to vote for rationale, and I think we need more time to come up with a better rationale.
So, in hearing from several of you, one thing we could do is to, specifically looking at that area north of the airport and specifically the agricultural designated area up there, bring you some land use scenarios. Here's what we think could happen, and here's why. And maybe that's a future discussion that leads back to readdressing whether we need to change anything or not. I believe from the pattern of development that's been occurring up there that while this hasn't been triggered yet because of all of the undeveloped land, it soon will be triggered by many changes up there because the development has reached the point where the density of development is enough to trigger the major amendment. But if we bring you scenarios, what could go up there? From a planner's perspective, we're not just going to invent something. It's going to be based on good planning practice. Bring it to you and let you look at it. Maybe this is another future discussion.
So we're looking at maybe stating these, in generality, this, and this could be up here, not necessarily saying, all right, this section here is only going to be commercial. Then you're telling the property owner what they can do or not do with there. But to have a general thing over a general area. That's what we're looking at?
That's what we're looking at.
Ralph?
Ralph Hess. I'm going to read a portion of section 946106H, which refers to a major amendment. And it says, for the purposes of this subsection, major amendment means a substantial alteration of the municipality's land use mixture or balance as established in the municipality's existing general plan land use element. The municipality's general plan shall define the criteria to determine if a proposed amendment to the general plan affects a substantial alteration of the municipality's land use mixture or balance as established in the municipality's existing general plan land use element. And it also indicates that major amendment under the statutory provision, it requires a two-thirds vote of the governing body.
Correct.
So using that as the guideline, I think, I'll tell you a half mile is better than a quarter mile, but in my view. But I still think that using that statutory language, any change in the land use map, that should be a major amendment. I'm just going to reiterate my position on that.
Even though the statutes specifically call out substantial change.
Right.
You're saying any change is a substantial change.
Well, I'm saying a change in the land use map is a substantial change because that's the only thing that has any enforcement. And one of the things that we've been concerned with, or I think we've been concerned with, is there's no enforcement provision in this general plan. It's been treated as a guideline, and it's been, the public have been dissatisfied a lot of times with decisions that have been made that found developments to be in compliance with the general plan, or just taken as a guideline to say, well, we're going to approve it anyway. And so I'm trying to build, I think we need to build some enforceability into this general plan. And this is one way to do it.
Rod?
Yeah, well, the passage that Ralph just read is quite a different criteria than what we're seeing here. This only addresses the number of homes within a given annulus.
There's a text section that talks about substantial amendments.
Okay, so that particular section says if it substantially impacts the mix of uses within that area. And have we really Does this chart address that? And no, it really doesn't.
By itself, the matrix does not. But again,
Okay,
if you
but the
read
text that goes
section
with
above
it.
that, it talks about text amendments or other types of changes. So
Okay.
we have addressed all of the issues in the section that Ralph read out of the statutes.
Okay.
The way we've addressed it has been largely focused on the acreage matrix because the areas we anticipated at the time we wrote it to have the most impact were those new areas that we're developing rather than infill development on relatively small parcels in the existing city, the existing developed area of the city.
Tom?
I'd just like to comment that this wasn't a discussion. This was a dialogue, and a very effective one that allowed us to think together. And I really appreciate that.
I understand where Ralph is coming from, and I don't necessarily 100% disagree. But the definition of substantial, I mean, I think there needs to be some criteria that we put out there. Otherwise, what's substantial to one city council is not going to be substantial to another and not substantial to another. I think that's an insufficient definition. I think that what we have here and what we have used has been a pretty good definition. I do like the idea of going to the half mile. I think that helps out quite a bit. But what we've had works and is working. So I guess my question is, let's do some good planning, number one, and number two, getting the definition of substantial down, I think requires a little bit of thought. We just can't leave it in there as substantial, too vague, too broad brush, and that word can be manipulated so many different ways.
So is the consensus of the committee that you would like us to bring you back some examples of scenarios, land use scenarios for that area so that you can consider just what kinds of things maybe? I mean, rather than just looking at a green blotch.
Great.
You'd be better at it
Yes.
than we would.
I think people would like to see that,
Okay.
both us
We-
and the
we can-
public.
We can do that.
It's too large area of discussion not to have more discussion.
It's about the size of Midtown Manhattan.
Might be a little bigger.
Okay, so do we have any more are we satisfied where we're at now on the major amendments to the general plan? And we'll come back to it.
We'll bring you something back
And
for
also
further
maybe
discussion.
you can say, if we do go from a quarter mile to a half mile, give us a couple examples of what effect that would have
how
had.
that would have- yeah.
On
We can do that.
So give us a couple examples.
We can
what
do
would
that.
do. And
George?
How about city council? Ted, sitting over there, how do you feel about that?
You woke him up, dang it.
And things were going so well.
I go back to the comment I made about specificity. George and I go back a number of years on the Planning Commission. We can cite the example of the mini storage on Willow Creek and Pioneer Parkway. We can talk about how many developers came in to propose something that vaguely represented affordable housing, and neighbors nearby, their heads blew off and they didn't want it. So when I was talking about specificity, I think the important thing is I don't care how you become specific, but when people see that the general plan says that this area ought to be rezoned from residential to business general, or this open space ought to be zoned for a police and fire station, I know we don't like to micromanage, but the degree to which you can say it in the general plan and then the people vote for it is the degree to which, when it comes up a year, 2 years later, you voted for it. Because I think it's important, and just like we did a good job of publicizing the open house. Remember, we had over 200 people, never came close to that. You need to get on the radio stations and get in the Courier and say, look, this time read this general plan before you vote on it, because we're going to hold you to it when it comes time to rezone or put in workforce housing or use open space for a police station or a fire station, because they got to know that. As I said, every time I sit up there and 50 people don't want to do something, I'm asking them, what are the other 46,950? What do they want to do? Because they're not here.
All right, any other comments? Jim?
Yeah, something trivial in comparison. I actually like Scottsdale's matrix. It's not specific enough, and you'd have to modify it, but if you can do something more like that, it's a lot easier to follow.
I kind of liked it too, Jim.
Okay.
And I also like Gilbert's simple description of their major plan criteria.
We will.
But the Scottsdale matrix, that's pretty easy to follow. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a statement.
Go ahead, George.
I agree with Tom Hutchison on the fact that this type of dialogue is extremely helpful for you. I could see it, but it's also very helpful for us. So thank you.
Okay. All right, great. Good. Well, that's why we put the tables like this. We want it to be more of a workshop than, a meeting, is a formal meeting. It's like we want exchange of ideas.
Getting you closer together works. So next time, there's only going to be 2 tables.
Okay.
Well,
Come on now, yeah.
this was hard enough. So our next meeting is March 27th, the last Wednesday at 2:00. We'll do economic competitiveness and prosperity, which includes economic development and tourism, growth and cost development, housing, and airport. So we'll have representation already from economic development there to help answer any questions for their section, because it was pretty hefty. So
Can you read that list for the agenda one more time? Sorry.
economic development and tourism, growth and cost of development, housing, and airport.
Okay, that's going to be a full day. I mean, it's going to be a packed 3 hours.
We can see if the room's available. I'm sure it is, but I mean, I don't know if everybody's available at 1:00 to start earlier, or send them back. I'm out.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Does that sound good? Jim, you got it? Any other?
I think with it all together, it's going to make you're going to see it make a little bit more sense. It'll flow better. And then we're going to start meeting with we have Kimley Horn on board for the final, and they're going to help with the promotion material for the outreach for the election. So we're going to have all that stuff available to you guys next year when we get to that point, because we just got to get through this year. Okay. So.
And we may change some of the major chapter names to make them easier for Tammy to pronounce.
Okay.
Late
And
today.
for the rest of the committee here, how do you guys feel about starting at 1, since we have so much to cover next month? I can order some. Domino's Pizza is just a block away, so order some pizza.
I'm fine, we'll start at
1 o'clock sounds good.
I'll be here too.
One sounds great.
Okay, okay, so let's shoot for 1. See if the room is available, and then let us know.
Okay.
Okay. Great.
As an alternative,
All right.
is there any chance that we could meet a couple days a month? Because some people's brains, like mine, get fuzzy after a certain number of hours.
I think with the chapters coming through, and I'll get them out to you well in advance, because I have most of the chapters almost
Okay.
complete now.
That's-
I'm just
that's
waiting for
great.
certain sections, but like that one, I can get out to you in another week, where you have plenty of time to review it and have. And then if you also, would it help to have paper copies available for you to come pick up at the office?
Yes.
Okay, that way you can write on it and make comments and leave it for me at the meeting. I will let you know when they are available. And like I said, this one, I actually have most of it done. The only thing we're waiting on is the housing, because they're working with city council for goals and strategies. So, but I have everything else about done. I just got to go through and wordsmith it a little bit. But I should be able to have that ready for you in the next week or so. And then I'll email you that we have the hard copies available for you to come pick up at the office.
Again, they're going to look a little different than what you saw today. It's going to be a comprehensive chapter.
Yep.
Are you in this building yet, or are you still over there?
You're at the other one.
Okay, so when you say office, you mean over
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good point.
Just a quick comment.
Go ahead. Yeah, Tom?
I read lips. You guys know that, some of you don't. So this works good. I had trouble seeing Ralph and Don.
You're lucky.
So more of a square is helpful.
Yeah, this works good. This
We
is a
have
good
to think
space.
about the
Yeah.
cameras.
Right,
and-
cameras. This is a good space.
And we actually should, usually we have stuff on the screen. I don't know what happened today. So, but we have cameras. We have to make sure, but these aren't really circular.
All right, any,
Yeah.
okay.
figure it out.
Comments, questions, suggestions, going once, going twice? Meeting adjourned.
Wonderful.
Thank you all.